to this webinar series on Amazon Japan. We are, doing this series to help sellers who are already selling in the Amazon marketplace, either in the US or the UK or one of the other markets, and are looking to expand to Japan. So what we're doing with this series is that we're getting on some really cool guests here who can actually help us understand that market, which is like so tough and sometimes out of reach. So today I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Anthony. He is living in Tokyo, I believe, right, Anthony?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, cool. So I'm just, I met Anthony on LinkedIn because, I was browsing through a lot of magazines and so on, and I came across their magazine. It's called Kokoro, which means heart. And then I just started following his writing, and I just thought he would be a cool guest to have on this webinar. So I'm gonna hand this over to Anthony, and if you can introduce yourself, give us a little background about who you are, where you're from, and about your company. So over to you.
My pleasure, and thank you for the kind introduction. So, as you mentioned, I'm Anthony Griffin. I have lived and worked in Japan for 12 years. So right now I'm a sole proprietor and I run a boutique marketing and communications consultancy called Saga Consulting. However, today I'm here on behalf of Kokoro Media, which is a website where we produce articles about Japanese culture. We interview people all over Japan and all over the world about their business and life in Japan. And that's, as Ritu mentioned, that's how we got connected on LinkedIn through that content. I'm originally from California, and my background is in business and marketing. I came to Japan in 2009, where I got into business education, training, coaching, and then eventually back to marketing management when I worked at the American Chamber of Commerce here in Japan. After that, I started to work independently, and here I am today helping Japanese companies market all over the world.
Awesome. That's such an amazing introduction. So, Anthony, we're just going to have you tell us a little bit about Japan because, our audience is super interested in that market. And, we've tried to give our listeners a little bit of a background about, what kind of, things to expect in Japan, especially when they try to expand to this market. And as I mentioned earlier, we're primarily looking at Amazon sellers who already have an established market elsewhere, and they're, looking at new opportunities. So one of the stumbling blocks, I guess, to trying to expand into this new market is not having enough information about the culture there, right? And we know it's different. We kind of always get glimpses of the Japanese culture through anime or manga and that kind of stuff. But really, would love to have you, since you've been living there since 2009. Would love to have you give us an overview of the Japanese culture. What are the highlights that you as a foreigner have noticed there? What might be interesting to someone who is looking to sell their products in Japan?
Okay, that is a huge question. I mean, we could talk forever about Japanese culture. It's so deep, so rich, so diverse. So today, I think I'll focus on the things that impact me as a professional here and as someone in the business scene. And the first and probably biggest thing that is different from a lot of Western cultures is, like a lot of cultures in this region, business is very relationship focused. So that means business partnerships tend to be long-term. They tend to be built on trust as opposed to, oh, your product has the best price or your product has the best feature and so on. So this is a little bit different online, but in general, you want to build relationships. You want to generate trust with your business partners and your customers. The second thing I would say that stands out about this culture is Japan historically has been very isolated, and Japan is a very monocultural, which means basically 98% of the population here is Japanese. That's very different than a lot of other international markets. So that aspect of the culture means that you can't just use the strategy you're using all over the world or in any other country. You just can't use that here. You need to build a marketing and communication strategy from the ground up to serve this unique market. So those are the two big ones, I think.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, in fact, I do remember when I used to live in Japan, and I've lived there for 17 years. And, this was one of the things that, really stood out for me as well, because, I was part of a pre-sales team for a software company. And I used to be like, always wondering, when will this deal close? Because it wouldn't close. Like, it would just be open for like a year, and we're still kind of just being lukewarm about it. So you're right. I think the most important keyword here is trust. And the way you can portray your brand in Japan for the Japanese people, it has to, kind of have all those elements of trust that the Japanese people are looking for, right? And one of the ways that we can kind of achieve that with Amazon Japan is by really investing in your storefront, for example, which is kind of telling your brand story and letting people know about you as a company, and not just about a product or a feature of a product. So it's more about letting people feel like they can trust you. So I really love that point that you brought out, and it's very, very relevant. Cool.
Yeah, to add to that, actually,
Yeah.
I thought you brought up a good point about telling your story, on your storefront and things like that. If you compare the typical Japanese website to a typical, let's say, American website, you're going to find the Japanese one is a lot more explanatory, a lot more text heavy, and perhaps that's a way online to start building that trust and comfort with the audience. So that was a good point you brought up.
How different is the Japanese culture from the Western world? And I kind of think we've covered that in the first question, but let's say someone who has a listing on their Amazon US store, and now they want to take that to the Amazon Japan store. How would the cultural aspect of Japan being so different kind of play into the way we go about translating it? Would it just be just kind of taking that listing and translating it for a Japanese audience? Would we try to alter that, make it different? What are your thoughts about those kind of differences, and how sellers can kind of keep in mind the key differences and incorporate that in their translations of their listings?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Ritu, because this is something that comes up when I work with international clients. Obviously, you have to translate it into Japanese, but it's so much more than that. You need to localize, which means you're probably going to need to tear down your existing marketing message and rebuild it from the ground up, ideally with someone over here, or someone who knows not only how to write Japanese, but knows how to market and copyright in Japanese. So it's so much more than just using Google Translate, or even using just an entry-level translator. You really need just to reconstruct your strategy and messaging for this unique market.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We do work with a few brands that are, wanting to expand to Japan, and that's the first thing we noticed, that, their listing is almost perfect from a Japanese standpoint, but there's problems with that, and it's not kind of moving fast enough. So we're actually in the process of investigating what we can do to improve that listing, because we've used all the keywords, we've done all the research on which keywords convert and all that stuff, but yet it just doesn't seem to be moving. And so we're actually trying to figure out, is there any different way of saying this? Like, would it appeal more if we could bring certain points up before others and stuff like that? So it's an involved process. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say online for a new market entry is just difficult in Japan, because it's harder to build those relationships that we mentioned and that trust. So depending on how big your organization is or your product, you might want to take an integrated marketing approach, and you might want to set up events or some physical traditional marketing component for your campaign that complements or supports the online side. Because especially in my experience, just putting something online and saying, hey, we're here, here's our product, that is a very difficult approach here in Japan. So, think of marketing holistically. Don't just think of it as let's go, online and put a few digital ads. Think about if there's anything else you can do on the ground to support your digital efforts.
What you might think are the key best practices around like marketing, on Amazon as well as off Amazon. What might be some things to keep in mind that our listeners can take advantage of?
Great question. Again, you got to approach it holistically. So in addition to pure proper localization, like we talked about earlier, you just have to think about this unique consumer here, and that's everything from package design, the size of the package, the imagery on the package, the how you write the copy on the package. Is your documentation or your manuals clear and translated correctly? So really, you just have to pay attention to every detail.
Who is the influencer in shopping decisions at home? Like, is it the head of the family, as they call it in Japan? Who decides? Like, who makes who kind of is the one who decides whether they should purchase something from Amazon or not, like online or not?
This to me is something that's evolving in society. So traditionally speaking, you had more, I guess, quote unquote, traditional gender roles where the husband was the primary income provider. However, the wife and mother in a family would manage all the finances. So she would be the decision maker, especially for household goods and things like that. Now, as a lot of people know, that is changing. So we have a lot of dual income families. We have a lot of different family types. So, I think you're going to see patterns that are similar to other countries in this regard. However, this is also an aging society. So you're also going to see a lot of the traditional patterns as well. So this is kind of in a state of flux, in my opinion.
Right, and I heard that the kind of older generation tends to prefer Rakuten over Amazon. I'm not sure if that's something you've seen, or do you think the younger generation prefer different platforms? What's your opinion about that?
Good point. I have witnessed that too, and I will say I don't have the data on how big this trend is, but I have also heard that of younger people, or at least people around my age, who also prefer Rakuten. It's the home team player. It's localized. It's more Japanese than Amazon. So again, I don't have the data to see how big this trend is, but Rakuten is a much stronger competitor here than it is anywhere else in the world.
So do you think when people, let's say, find a product in a physical store, do they go and check if they can get a better price online, like on Rakuten or on Amazon? Is that something you've seen?
I'm sure it's something to consider for price-conscious consumers. Now, is this concept of showrooming as big as it is in the States and other countries? I do not get that impression. In general, a lot of consumers in Japan are still happy to get physical goods in the store. Go to the store, get a Blu-ray, get a book. We still have physical DVD, Blu-ray rental stores. So a lot of people are just happy to go to the store and buy their product. Also, you can get, point cards are incredibly popular here. So people like to go to the store and get their points for buying things, and then you can spend those points or save those points. However, the pandemic is accelerating e-commerce incredibly. So we need to be aware of that and be aware that this landscape might change permanently, even when the pandemic subsides.
Right. Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think, the Japanese people really love their point systems. I totally remember that from when I was back, in Japan. So Amazon fortunately has actually started the point system. So you, in addition
Yes.
to getting discounts on online, you can also get your points, and that just creates like this loyalty, following for certain brands, and people actually do come back. Yeah, and I think one more thing that I remember from when I was back in Japan is that people tend to be very kind of brand loyal. So if they purchased from a particular brand once and if they've liked it, they will go back, right? I don't know if that's your impression as well.
Absolutely. Brands are incredibly powerful here. So you want to protect your brand, you want to build your brand. And if you do, that brand can insulate you from price-based competition or competitors that might be more innovative or faster moving. So I agree with you. Brands are incredibly important here.
What might be some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to branding? Is there a right way of doing it? Is there a wrong way of doing it? Like with Amazon Japan, there's very limited areas that people actually have control over. Like there's a title that their listings have. There are some bullet points, about 5 in most cases, and then they have some HTML content that can be used to kind of describe the product in more detail. And they have some images, right? So that's the typical Amazon page, and it's kind of the same across the board. Have you seen any like terrible examples of listings on Amazon that you maybe looked at and said, "Oh, this is terrible. I'm not going to trust this." Do they sense that? Are they able to read a listing and tell if it's maybe from a factory brand, maybe in China or some other place, or if it's a well done one? What are some of the kind of do's and don'ts when it comes to our audience that is looking to kind of create like an impression on the customer when through their listing?
Wow. Yeah. I hate to keep going back to the same topic, but I have seen exactly what you mentioned on Amazon listings, and it goes back to the localization and translation. However, I won't even say localization in this case. Let's go back to the basics of translation. So machine translation is a big no-no. That will destroy your brand. And why do I say this? I shop on Amazon here in Japan, and if you do, you're going to eventually have to read Japanese. And so sometimes when I'm making a purchase decision, I'll read the comments from Japanese users, and they will call out poor copywriting, or they'll say, "Oh, the language doesn't look right, the instruction manual's poor, this is obviously not a quality product," or something like that. So that is real. So it goes back to investing in proper localization. And I'd also like to call out what you mentioned earlier is storytelling, because that's how you're going to stand out and generate interest in your product and maybe show why your product is better than the competition. So those are 2 ways to stand out from the competition on a digital level. In general, I think the rules and laws of branding are pretty universal. So, you want to do the same things you're doing in other countries, just making sure that your brand is professional looking, that it's exciting. And also, when you are entering a new culture, be sure that you don't unintentionally offend your customers. So that means doing your cultural homework as well before you start selling.
Would you kind of like to share a little bit about your magazine, like how it might be able to help people understand or kind of do their homework when it comes to understanding Japanese customers?
Yes, so the website you would want to check out if you're interested is KokoroJP.com. So if you go there, you'll see a lot of articles, and you'll see the opportunity to follow our social media accounts or sign up for our email newsletter. And I think, again, it's a great resource for getting a feel for Japanese culture before you launch a product or service here.
Awesome. Yeah. So I am just going to share my screen so that I can let people see what it looks like.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just share my screen. All right. So yeah, so that's what the website looks like. And there's a lot of really good articles here. And okay, so that's what the website looks like. And there are really a lot of good articles here. And I see that there's a newsletter that you can subscribe to kind of get your crash course.
Yes, thank you.
Right. And it's got really interesting stuff. And it's in English, guys. So it'll be easy for you guys to absorb what has been written and, all the efforts that Anthony and his team are really putting into this website. It's really high quality stuff. So check it out, and we'll keep Anthony close to us. We're gonna keep partnering with him and maybe have him come back on another a webinar in the future. But if you have any questions, kind of feel free to ask in the comments section below, and we'll make sure we get you some answers there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It was a pleasure talking to you. I just find, foreigners living in Japan just so fascinating because, it's such, it's a culture shock you have to kind of overcome, and then you got to make a living there and all that stuff. So I really admire, your courage and your effort there.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. And I mean, the experience yourself. So, it's always great to speak with someone else who has lived here and worked here as well. So this has been a true pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, we will see you guys around. Stay tuned for the next webinar on Amazon Japan and the Japan series. Bye.
All right.